Thank you, Dawn. As Dawn said, my name's Craig. Good to meet all of you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Brilliant. Now, I understand I've just arrived at the forum, and this is my first one, so really excited to be here. I understand this is the last session before lunch. Oh, so I'm not sure how many questions I'll get. But if you could do me a favour, if you could humour me, I might just ask you all if you're able to stand up quickly, just for 10 seconds, just to shake it out a little bit, get a bit of oxygen into your lungs, which will help me to keep you engaged. So a bit of a hack here, really. So a bit of a cheat, but a couple of deep breaths. And we are a safety, medical and mental health company, so always like to do this when we can. And please have a seat. So and I'm not sure, am I driving with this? John?
Yes.
Perfect. So as I said, Craig Cowdrey is my name. As Dawn mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Sonder. I'll introduce us a little bit if you haven't heard of us before. But what I'm here to talk to you about today is a little bit of a different topic I'd expect from what you might typically hear in this type of environment, which is around personal safety and specifically employee safety. Not only when an employee is at work and performing their duties, but also on their way to and from work and out and about in the world generally. And specifically, the focus on personal safety is a key foundational element of wellbeing, which is often overlooked, but absolutely critical, as well as the impact of the state of the world right now in both real and perceived personal safety threats and what we call permacrisis, which I won't go into too much depth about, which will all be intuitive to you and with a constant information feed into all of the devices we carry around in our pockets, it seems like every day there's a new crisis bubbling up in the world and that it's all right in our faces. This is causing, as I mentioned, perceived anxiety and issues, but it's also causing real safety threats, especially for frontline workers, and especially, as the last speaker mentioned, around cost of living crisis and how that's manifesting in things like customer aggression, hostility in stores, at restaurants, out on the streets and the like. So as I mentioned, just a quick introduction. So there I am, do similar talk. This is in our Asia Pacific headquarters in Sydney. We operate globally as a business. As I mentioned, if you haven't heard of us, we're an active care technology company that partners with large organisations traditionally, but now organisations of all sizes, supporting nearly 1 million employees across their personal safety, medical and mental health, operating across the world. A little bit about my background, which I suppose is probably quite relevant to this topic around personal safety. Before co-founding Sonder 7 years ago with my two co-founders, a background in the Australian Army. I was an Australian Army captain, served overseas around the world, and went from there into the diplomatic course, so worked as an Australian diplomat in different environments around the world as well. And my two co-founders were both Australian Special Forces officers, and really it was our backgrounds in managing complex operations where the stakes were high that led us to found Sonder and create the vision that we have, which is to provide global support through the right care at the right time. But actually, the first 3 to 4 years of the journey of Sonder was really focused on personal safety, and was only after a few years that we broadened out our support to be also around medical and mental health, because what I'll talk about a little bit is just the undeniable link between safety, medical and mental health, and often they are so interrelated as well. So this is just a quick snapshot of one of the 3 24/7 operations centres that we have around the world. This one's in Sydney, we've got one here in London, also in Auckland, New Zealand, really providing a level of high proactive and highly responsive support to employees across their safety, medical and mental health needs. I won't talk too much about Sonder and what it is that we do specifically. If you'd like to learn more, we're out in the stand 35 from memory. Yeah, brilliant. So a little bit more around the world that we're living in right now, what we really mean by this state of permacrisis. Again, it's intuitive to everyone, I'm sure, but cost of living continues to be a real issue. 6.7% inflation holding steady. That's not really coming down despite the best efforts of monetary policy and Reserve Bank institutions around the world. That's causing prices to rise for everyday living. There's worries around conflicts around the world. We went from COVID into more local crises, political crises here in the UK. We've got the war in Ukraine. Now we've got a really disturbing and upsetting conflict in the Middle East that's happening as well. We've got record numbers of customer aggression and hostility events in stores like Tesco and others. Anyone with frontline staff are facing these types of issues. I will note though, and this would be the first thing that I would encourage all of you to remember when you're you might be dealing with issues around personal safety, is to remind your people that actually the world has actually never been safer at a high level than right now in this year. And in fact, even in the UK, overall crime is down 12% compared to the year before COVID. But that's not the perception. And for the people that are confronting safety issues, it's certainly not their reality. But it is a good check to just stop and remember that actually, to keep the perspective and the context that the world is a relatively safer place than it was even 5 years ago, and certainly 50 years ago and 100 years ago. Nevertheless, there is a lot of data to show that personal safety issues are real and confronting for a lot of workers, and certainly the issues that are happening abroad, fed straight into people's phones, are causing an increase in perceived risk as well. So in the next 15 minutes or so, and as Dawn said, we'll try and leave some time for questions, should there be any. Certainly won't keep you from lunch. We're going to cover why the future of wellbeing means going back to basics, what the 3 million safety engagements that Sonder has engaged with our nearly million employees that we support around the world have taught us, and how some of the top organisations we work with, like McDonald's, PwC, KPMG and the like, have taught us about supporting personal safety. So this is the first part around back to basics. Who's familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Yep, I don't know if someone's waving, but also saying yes, so thank you for that. So it's a fundamental framework, which I've used the word intuitive a couple of times already, and I really do think these things are quite intuitive. We all want to get to that top level. We want to help our people in organisations to get to that top level of self-actualisation, which is really fulfilling your life's potential, and whatever that might be is up to that individual. But you can't get there unless you've got the base in place. There's a lot of talk, and there's been a lot of good work done around normalising the conversation around mental health, for example, around supporting the medical needs of our staff to get those foundations in place. But what we've seen over the years of operating around the world is that physical safety has often been overlooked. Now, there are some industries where physical safety is particularly focused on, for example, in manufacturing, occupational health and safety in the workplace. But for those people outside of those specific industries, there's not been a real focus on making sure that people feel personally safe. Now, if you're not safe, if you don't feel safe leaving the office late at night and walking to the tube station on your own, if you don't feel safe in your own home because of family abuse issues and domestic violence issues, then clearly it's really difficult to get further up that pyramid to a place where you can actually fulfill your potential and have the purpose that will ultimately satisfy you in your life and be that contributor to your family, to your friends, to your community, and of course to your employer as well. Now, I would mention that this really aligns with Sonder and the way that we approach partnering with organisations to support their people. As I touched on, we don't know what it is that is going to provide somebody with that self-actualisation, fulfilling their purpose, but at the why of Sonder, our purpose is to empower people to be at their best. Ultimately, to help them with the foundations, to then choose their own destiny and their own journey on top of that, not for us to tell them what is going to make them happy or satisfied. And it's not for, in our view and our philosophy, for organisations to do everything for the person. It's the organisations and our responsibility to really give them the tools to be able to do that for themselves. And that's why we really focus on that base. Then they can go to the top of that pyramid, ideally on their own. So here's some stats that we conducted some research earlier this year with a research company called Vivaldi. And a lot of these stats won't surprise all of you in the room. I mean, 91% important for their employer to consider their support employees' overall wellbeing. 73% important to offer physical wellbeing benefits around medical health, fitness, nutrition and the like. 83% important to offer mental wellbeing benefits. One that may surprise you is 84% considered important for employers to offer personal safety benefits. And I'd be interested, if not now, then if we have a chat after this, about whether or not that's consistent with your experience as professionals within this space. It was certainly something that kind of surprised us as an organisation. I mentioned that we started off in personal safety and really focusing on lone workers, travelling on their own, meeting clients on their own. We also support hundreds of thousands of students at minor universities who are moving around in their own, often in vulnerable situations. We were quite surprised when the real demand was there also amongst the white collar industry when they were having often younger graduates and associates at firms going to client events on their own, going to client sites on their own, travelling on their own, that there's a real desire for support around personal safety as well. A less surprising one, of course, was frontline workers, retail groceries, quick service restaurants, anyone dealing with the public, especially in this heightened crisis state that we're in now. People who are moving around open spaces where there might be protests and the like. Less surprising, but certainly a lot of people really are requiring that personal safety support. We also found that 28% of people have been threatened or assaulted in public spaces. Again, a sort of shockingly high number, or perhaps unfortunately not so shockingly these days. And I remember when I returned from my last posting as a diplomat before starting Sonder with my co-founders, I'd last been in Hong Kong. Anyone been to Hong Kong? Brilliant place. I was there 3.5 years, and incredibly safe place, really well organised and law enforcement really strong. And I kind of had reverse culture shock going back to Australia and feeling unsafe on the streets there and just feeling a bit sort of nervous, a bit anxious on the streets walking around in a place that I'd naturally considered to be a really safe place, and it is. But it just goes to show I was in the army for many years, served overseas, and I was still feeling quite vulnerable, 6'3" guy walking around the streets of Melbourne and Sydney. But everyone can have these feelings. Over 3,300,000 safety engagements that we've had now with the employees that we support. That's everything from them hitting safety alerts when they're in trouble, from a safety alert going off when we're helping to track somebody on their way home or to their workplace, incidents within a McDonald's restaurant or a grocery retail store and the like. So what have we learned from all of these engagements? Safety-related critical incidents are rising. We've seen across, and varies a little bit by grocery retailers as an example, but a 14% increase in the last 9 months across issues of safety within a store environment. So that's typically related to shoplifting or abuse. Through COVID, there's a lot of abuse that occurred, and that's unfortunately continued within those retail environments. Number two, when it comes to safety, forewarned is forearmed. So as much as organisations can be proactive by sending alerts and giving information and tools to their employees to be ready should something go wrong, the better. It is a balance between not alarming people and having people on edge, but being prepared appropriately. That means giving training to managers how to deal with customer aggression, hostility events, training to employees. One of the biggest issues we see are well-intentioned employees who try to stop a shoplifter in the retail environment and context, and then leading to a physical altercation. And often that employee is doing that in breach of the actual organisation's policies for what they should do. But they are frustrated, they're human too, they want to stop this person from doing something wrong. They're frustrated, like a lot of people, at the lack of, or the decreased amount of budget given to law enforcement to actually enforce the law in these environments, and the shoplifting epidemic that's going on right now. But if organisations can properly train their people and enable managers to actually adhere to the policies that are put in place to protect the safety of those employees, then they're doing a lot better when it comes to avoiding or mitigating the risk of harm. EAPs do some fantastic work, but in the space of personal safety, they really don't do much work at all. What we've seen is that EAPs, and we're not an EAP, are largely reactive, not proactive, are not forewarning and therefore forearming organisations to deal with personal safety issues either. Now, I think I've got 5 minutes left for questions, so I did try and keep it short. Believe it or not, a lot of my colleagues won't believe I kept it this short, but so you guys can tell them. So this is the sort of, I guess, soft sell and cliched, cheesy pitch of Sonder. If you want to talk to us, we're out there and talk to us about what we've learned in the world of personal safety. But the takeaways that I try to leave you with in this really bite-sized presentation is going back to basics. That foundation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, putting in place the tools, the systems, the processes to allow employees to take control of their own wellbeing, and that includes critically not just mental health and medical, and there's been a lot of good work done in that space, but also the personal safety side for those that are dealing with risks on a daily basis, that's also causing mental health issues as well. Putting that building block in place, fantastic way for them to then have those employees go further up that hierarchy of needs. Secondly, employees are demanding support across safety, and we've seen that across the nearly 1 million employees that we support, as well as the research we've done. And that safety is I've touched on this a couple of times, inextricably related to medical and mental health. We've seen employees who've dealt with members of the public who might have abused them on their way to work. They suddenly just want to work from home. It's too difficult to go into the office, even though their employer is wanting them to come in. We've seen employees who've dealt with knife-wielding assailants within a frontline worker perspective, who then understandably are traumatised and don't want to come back to work, increasing absenteeism and staff turnover because of that. So those are the takeaways I'd leave. There's a lot more to discuss if we had time, but I will leave a couple of minutes now for any questions or comments that there might be.